As the summer travel season approaches, I'm excited to let you know about 2 upcoming Taste Travels, our immersive travel series hosted by cookbook authors and me, Matt Rodbard. On June 15th, I will be joining the Mediterranean dish author Susie Carace in Barcelona for an incredible week of culinary tours, cooking classes, and plenty of wine and jamon. And on September 15th, I will be joining author and baker Mauricio Leo of The Perfect Loaf for a tour of northern Italy. We will visit artisanal Parmigiano Reggiano and balsamic vinegar producers, take a masterclass in the art of panettone, and of course, eat plenty of stuffed pasta and mortadella in and around Emilia-Romagna. Both trips are nearly sold out and closing soon. If interested, write into hello@tastecooking.com and we will get you the information. That's hello@tastecooking.com. I hope to see you on one of our taste travels this summer.
I've always believed that there are a few things that are a window into society. Sports is one. Education is another one. How people choose to educate their children, where they educate them. Food is a big one.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. It was really fun having Michele Norris in the studio. Michele is the host of the great podcast Your Mama's Kitchen and the founder of the Race Card Project. A respected journalist, Michele co-hosted National Public Radio's evening news program All Things Considered from 2002 to 2011 and was the first African-American female host for NPR. In this episode, we talk about Michele's journalism career and what draws her to stories in the food orbit. Also on the show, we have a great talk with the cookbook author and artist Erin Gleason. Erin is behind the best-selling Forest Feast series, and she's the author of a really cool art book, The Watercolor Feast. It's a guide to painting fruits, vegetables, and flowers, and it leads to a great conversation about Erin's career and why more of us should buy a set of watercolors and just paint. And at the top of the show, it's the return of 3 things, where Eliza and I talk about what is exciting us in the world of restaurants, cookbooks, and the food world as a whole. I hope you enjoy this episode. Eliza, we're back with 3 things. How are you?
I'm good, Matt. How are you doing?
I'm great. Do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I was in New Orleans recently for my sister's wedding, which was so much fun. So I did a lot of family stuff, but I had to do a couple eating adventures, and I just wanted to call out this amazing tip that this baker, Bronwyn Wyatt, turned me on to, who bakes under Bayou St. Cakes in New Orleans. I said I was looking for gumbo because that's what I wanted, and she recommended Parkway Bakery, which is a very iconic po' boy stop in New Orleans. They've been open since 1911. They're like a real neighborhood staple up in Bayou St. John. But the tip that she said to me was that apparently a lot of people will put potato salad in their gumbo instead of the rice.
Interesting twist.
It was so good.
I love that. I love Parkway, too. My friend used to live in Bayou St. John, so I used to go a few times. What a great place. So,
have you done the potato salad in the gumbo?
So that's what I typically got gumbo at Coop's. That was my spot, and the chicken. But how did you feel the potato salad added to the gumbo?
So apparently this is a thing, like not just at Parkway, but just a general kind of New Orleans local order. I felt like it really like rounded out the flavor of the gumbo in a nice way. Like you had this kind of creamy potato salad, which was a little mustardy, not like too gloopy in any regard. And, you know, it was at the end of a big wedding weekend, so I felt like my body needed a little bit of like starch and carbs to get me through. And it was so great.
Wow.
What's your first thing?
My first thing is I'm starting with a novel that I'm reading. So I haven't finished this. I'm halfway through, and I just wanted to talk about it now because it's really great. It's called I Leave It Up to You. It's by the author Jinwoo Chong. And Jinwoo is the author of Flux, which was an award winner several years ago. Jinwoo is a Korean-American voice on the scene. And I love the setup of this book. You meet a narrator who wakes up from a coma 23 months in, and this narrator has been in the coma starting in 2019, wakes up in 2021. So some things happened between those times.
Did they?
Did they? Amazing framing there, and there's a lot of internal narrative. And I'll just say the reason I was mostly drawn to it, and I'll report back when I finish it, but I just wanted to talk about it now, is it's a lot of the novel is based in Fort Lee. at the narrator's father's Korean restaurant. And the food writing is terrific. And I just can't wait to finish this book and really talk about the way food plays into this narrative. But I want to know like so many things that are happening in this plot. And I just love the signature voices from Jin Woo Chung. It's I Leave It Up to You.
I love the title. I love the concept. I can't wait to read it.
Yeah. What's your next thing?
Well, since you're doing a culture rec, I want to do one, but I will say that there's a lot of consumption, but not a lot of food in this movie, which is Sinners, the new Ryan Coogler movie, which is a vampire movie. So the things that are being eaten are humans. But I loved this movie. I went to see it in theaters, which I would highly recommend. It just came out, so that's the only way you can watch it. But really, like seeing it on the big screen, the way that it's beautifully shot. The cinematographer actually is the first woman to have shot on IMAX, which I wish that had already happened before, but it's such a beautifully done movie, and the music is so fun. I just loved seeing it in the theater with everyone that was so like excited and into the movie. Yeah,
I want to see this movie. It might end up being a plane movie for me. I'm not sure if I can make the theater, but it seems like that would be a real disadvantage. It's all about
if you're not going to see it in a theater, at least like rent it on your home TV.
Yeah.
I feel like fitting it into a plain screen is just a really sad thing to think about.
I'm just being honest. I'm being transparent about when I watch these movies. But so it seems like this movie it's like breaking from the superhero movies and like the IP movies a little bit, right?
Yeah, I mean, it feels a very original concept.
Exactly.
It's a vampire movie set in Mississippi in, I believe, like 1930. And it's a lot about racial dynamics back then and also this kind of like human vampire dynamic that's going on. And really, it's about blues music. And I think like the soundtrack is just such an incredible part of that, which is another reason why I would suggest seeing it, like at least on good speakers so you can be kind of immersed in it in that kind of way. And it feels like a nice cultural moment happening right now. We were chatting off mic with our producer Clayton, who, you know, is a big box office watcher, about just the success it's seeing so far. And I hope that it continues to have that so that more Hollywood studios will take more chances on original work.
I love it. I'm gonna book my ticket now. And I'm plugging BO Boys. That's Clayton's and Pat's podcast. It's so great. My next thing is I have been sent a couple bars that have been making waves on the internet, on social media, and I want to give a little like early take. I've had a few of these bars in the morning after dinner. The first is David's Protein. Have you heard of this, David's Protein?
Yeah, when you said that they were bars making waves, this is the thing that I have been seeing, but I haven't seen it in person and I haven't tried it.
I'm gonna bring you one actually because I'm wanting to try it. So David's is let's go over the macros. It's each bar is 28 grams of protein, 150 calories, and 0 sugar. Flavors include peanut butter chocolate chunk and cookie dough. There's a fudge brownie. There's a cinnamon roll. So like they're really going a little wild with the flavors. The protein source is what I was interested in. And on the David's Protein bar, it's milk protein isolate, collagen, and whey protein. There's a little bit of egg white in there. So that's how they're getting this like these pretty like impressive macros. On the flavor side, it's very sweet. It's very sweet. But for me, I like it, especially for after dinner if you want to have like a healthier snack. It's really made waves because of the branding. Like it has a gold foil and just has like a really prominent David on it. It's the David bar.
Yeah, who is David? Do we know?
I don't know. The internet, the official website is full of YouTube videos, which is annoying. Sorry, I didn't mean to be negative, but like I'm trying to get information about it. It's like a bunch of YouTube videos. I don't know who David is. Maybe that's just my loss. That's David's Protein. The other one, and I've definitely seen this one on, they did a really nice influencer campaign. It's Hormbles Chormbles. That's the name.
Sorry.
Have you heard of it? Is it?
No, I just think the name is funny.
The name is amazing. It's a great name. So like they're playing around with like, you know, anything can be anything. And Hormbles Chormbles has 10 grams of protein, 100 calories, and 0 sugar per bar. So this is more of like a candy bar. It's not a protein bar, but like at 100 calories, the macros are quite interesting. They're really leaning into monk fruit as a sweetener, and I think when you get monk fruit going, it can be really successful in delivering umami and delivering salt. It really just amplifies the glutamates that are kicking. I would like to do a story on monk fruit sweeteners because I feel like there's just so much of it in our world right now, and it's just an interesting trend I'm seeing. Whey protein is the main protein source. What I like about it, there's a lot of crunch and salt within the bar. They're quite thin. These chocolate bars, and but it has a lot of texture and really feels like it's like a flavor profile of the moment. And I feel like at 100 calories, it's an interesting macro. It's pretty low for a chocolate bar. It's Hornbulls Chornbulls.
I just want to say I did some quick research, and it turns out that the founder of David is this guy, Peter Rahal, who did RX bars, but the name is actually a reference to Michelangelo's sculpture of David, which is very prominent on the homepage. So I guess the idea is that you two will be chiseled from marble after you've eaten these bars.
RX bars, they're kind of out now. So now that the guy needed to do something else, and now it's David. Mm-hmm. Eliza, what's your last thing? My
last thing is I want to talk about the new Big Night that has recently expanded. Big Night is I guess I would say shoppy shop in the best kind of way here in New York. They have 2 locations in the West Village and also in Greenpoint. The Greenpoint was the first location. They sell like all manner of home goods. People who are listening might remember that I had their founder, Catherine Lewin, on the show to talk about the Big Night entertaining book that came out, I believe, last year. But I was at the new expanded shop last night, and it's really just, I think, a nice space and even a better location to go shopping if you're looking for home or dining goods. They now have this expanded like home bar section, and I believe like a little bit more of like the snacking food kind of component as well. So they tripled the floor plan, not by buying a new location, but by getting rid of their stockroom that they had on site and like blowing out a wall and just kind of like making it breathe more. Also, the backyard, I think, is really nice and maybe something that like people don't know about if you're just like coming by the shop to pick up candlesticks or something.
Yeah, or cutting boards or favorite. I love their olive oil and vinegar selection. Yes. I shopped a lot at the West Village location, bought a bunch of gifts there. I remember I bought like a pasta-shaped candle. That was amazing. I just love that product. She has a great eye for trend and products. I'm so happy you mentioned that one.
What's your last thing?
My last thing is I was in Michigan last week. I was speaking at a conference, and I got to visit one of Lindsay Green's best new restaurants from 2023. And it's a restaurant I circled when she wrote about it. It's called Kung Fu Brothers Dumpling and Noodles. It's on the west side. It's in Westland, Michigan, which is actually where my grandma lived. And my grandma worked at the mall across the street. So I went by this mall that I hadn't been to in 15 years. And it like brought me back to like visiting grandma at the store she was working at. And like I hadn't been there. And when she was there in like the 90s and early 2000s, the food was like mostly fast food. It wasn't really there wasn't really a lot of interesting food there. I'm sorry, Westland, but this is the truth. So it's cool that there's now a growing community. There's a growing Chinese community that's in particular, and this restaurant has been noted as a favorite by Lindsay. And like for me, order at the counter, you can get xiaolongbao. They have a beef and lamb noodle soup. They do the hand-pulled noodles. It reminds me of that place we went to in Vegas.
Oh, Shang Artisan
Noodles.
I think about that place all the time.
So good.
Matt.
I do too. I think about it a lot when I see people in Vegas, like at like Aria. I'm like, guys are missing out. You got to be at Shang down the street. But Kung Fu is just really, really terrific. They do lots of different dumplings every single day. They're making them in the back. And what it reminds me of is like Detroit in particular. And part of my talk was talking about trends in Michigan. And per my research, just looking at the eater heat map for Chinese restaurants in Detroit, you've got Sichuan hot pot, you've got Cantonese barbecue, Peking duck. There's a Taiwanese tea house in Auburn Hills, and it's one of our country's, I would say, more underreported Asian food scene. And I hope somebody writes about it one day. Maybe it's me. I don't know.
That sounds great. I'm glad that you got to think about your grandma.
It was great. I had to text my mom, and my grandma passed many years ago. And it was just nice to remember that trip to the Westland Mall and drive by our old house. So it was cool. So
thanks for sharing your 3 things.
Thanks, Eliza. Michele Norris, welcome to This Is Taste. So great to meet you.
Matt, it's fantastic to be here.
I mean, we have a lot to cover. Your Mama's Kitchen, terrific podcast.
Thank you.
Linking to in the show notes. This is a podcast talking about another podcast. Rare for us. We're very protective. But yours is really amazing. We'll get into that.
Thank you.
You're visiting New York from Washington, D.C. I have to ask, and I always ask, where do you like to dine out when you visit New York?
Okay, I have a few places that I have come to know because my daughter went to college in New York. And when we would visit, you know the deal, Mom, Dad, take us out to dinner. Let me invite 16 of my friends. maybe, 3 or 4 for real.
Great
but
move.
it always felt like it
Yeah,
was,
yeah.
like an army of kids would come with us. She introduced us to Lartusi,
Oh, yeah.
which is fantastic.
I
I mean,
know.
it's always fantastic. Pasta's fantastic. They do a chicken, which is in this sort of leek and mushroom kind of brothy sauce that you just want to sop up. So I love Lartusi. I used to love Shopson's. I haven't been in a while.
Yeah.
Where they would yell at each other.
Were you in the West Village, the original?
The original Shopson.
The original Kenny Shopson.
Yes. I
working
read
there.
Calvin Trillin talk about it. I said, I got to go to this restaurant. I have to check this out. And they yelled at me the first time I went. I took too long to order, and I went back. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment, and I went back. I like Blue Ribbon Sushi.
Listen, it's classic.
Another one that my daughter introduced me to.
Yes.
I like Gabrielle.
Yeah. Carruthers? Or which?
The one on right by the Time Warner Center.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Which was always, when I worked at ABC, they'd take you to dinner at Gabrielle, and you didn't know, is this good news or bad news?
Wow. Let's step into that. Working at NPR, working at ABC, The Washington Post, being on air talent, being a reporter. Talk about the way food is used to recruit you for a job.
That's really interesting. So when I worked at The Washington Post, there was an African-American editor who would always take, I haven't told the story in years. I can't believe you triggered this memory.
I love it.
He would take us, there was a church run by someone named Daddy Grace, and they had a steam table soul food cafeteria. And when he took you out to lunch, I guess he was keeping it real, that he would take you to Daddy Grace's church for steamed table soul food, where they had like greens and collard greens and fried chicken and fricasseed chicken and chicken cooked like 1,000 ways. None of them good for you, but all of them delicious.
Oh my gosh, such a technically sound restaurant. Just sounds like it.
Yeah, it was fabulous.
So great.
And and we would have deep and great conversations, but you always wondered, why can't we go to the fancy hotel? Because he never took the to be honest, Caucasian reporters over to Daddy Grace's. So that, I don't know, when you asked me that question, that triggered it.
Yeah.
When I worked at ABC, Gabrielle was one of the restaurants that you went to. And you never knew if they were, this is just not working out, or we have news for you. We think that we're going to take you to the next level. You just never knew which one it was. So you were sweating your way to the restaurant. The other was Café d'Artiste, right? In back of the building.
Of course, with the apartments above, those iconic spaces.
And so there were always people leaning into each other and having very deep conversations because they didn't want anybody else to hear.
Oh, absolutely.
In the years that I worked at NPR was such an intense job. 2 hours on the air, 5 days a week. I used to come home. I had stains all over my clothes in the years that I worked there. And I took something to the dry cleaner, and she says, "You eat at your desk, don't you?"
I mean, anchoring all things considered.
Considering all things every day before 4.
Exactly. And you can't leave the booth.
You leave the booth, but you don't leave the building.
Or the building.
And you don't leave the second floor, really.
Yeah.
So going out to eat there was just, there were 3 hosts, and which meant one of us always had a little bit of time off. But when you had time off, the deal was that you were supposed to go out into the world and do some reporting.
Yeah.
So if Robert and Melissa, that was the trio when I was there. If they were hosting, I was in New Orleans. I was at a convention, covering politics. I was doing something, but generally not going out to eat.
No.
A whole lot.
I mean, a lot of campaign trails, I'm sure.
Yeah.
A lot of.
Yeah. And we could do a whole episode on campaign food.
Of course. And
food on a stick at a state fair someplace.
Oh, and let's do that. Actually, let's put a pin in that because I'd love to have you back. When you're at NPR, Michele, is there a memorable food story that you reported on while doing the journalism that millions heard every day?
There are a few. I've always believed that there are a few things that are a window into society. Sports is one. If you want to understand a culture, when you land in a distant land, look at how they celebrate sports and look at what sport they rally around. Education is another one, how people choose to educate their children, where they educate them. Take a look at the building, take a look at whether or not the children, and it by that standard, it's kind of sad when we see in some of the public schools in America, we could do better by sending a message to our kids. Food is a big one. And so I always try to use food as a way to, and at NPR you have 4 blocks, A, B, C, D, and then you do it again in the second hour. And so in the D block, you usually you could shift down a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I like to do food. We did a series where we gave people a certain amount of money, and we said, can you feed a family of 4 on this?
Mm-hmm.
So we talked to someone who was a chef on a big frigate in the Navy.
Yeah.
We talked to Jose Andres, who made us the dish that Tichy won him over with, which was this chickpea stew, which is, because he comes from very simple people.
Yeah.
We actually our kids were raised together. He lives in the Washington, D.C. area, so I've known Jose for a very long time. And he showed us how to stretch it with stale bread, and it made it a little heartier. So that was, an example. We did that with Ming Tsai, who taught us how to make fried rice for the masses. And
this is like 08, 09, around that?
This is around,
post-recession.
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of coverage around
Yes, exactly.
Stretch,
how you can make your dollar go farther in the kitchen. So, we did a few things like that. We always like to talk. I always like to talk to cookbook authors.
Yeah.
When I was on the air, and so we did a few things around that. So I tried to bring food into the process when I could.
It's amazing how NPR has supported cookbooks over the years. I have to say, just always been great to see a nationally syndicated outlet care about books.
Yeah.
So I have to shout that out. Let's go back to your upbringing in Minnesota. We talked off mic about you went to Wisconsin for a couple of years, transferred up to Minnesota for your degree in journalism.
Yes, represented by all the ground burrowing rodents, badgers.
Yeah,
badgers and gophers. And then I married a dude from Michigan, who not from Michigan, but went to the University of Michigan, and so we have wolverines in the mix too.
They are truly the ugliest mascots.
The badgers, the gophers, and the wolverines.
I mean, they're no Trojans,
Exactly.
Mighty Trojans. Anyways.
Or that little Notre Dame dude.
Oh, the fighting guy, with the boxing. That's an aside. What was food like in your kitchen growing up in Minnesota?
The word I reach for is abundant.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful for that, because I know that is not the word that a lot of people in this great land could say. So I'm blessed to be able to say that. My family loved food. It was part of their love language. My father cooked. He cooked in the Navy. He learned how to cook in the Navy. And so he carried that forward. My mother was a very good cook and was a very adventurous cook, and I really appreciate that, because my mother both my parents are African American. Mom is a 4th generation Minnesotan, and that's, if you know the Great Migration, that's unusual. She didn't come up through the Great Migration. She preceded that. Her family preceded that. So she grew up cooking, a different kind of cuisine than my father was used to, who came from Birmingham, Alabama, as part of the Great Migration to Chicago, and then eventually, when he met my mom, wound up moving to Minnesota. So she learned how to expand to a more Southern palate when she married my father. So I grew up on a lot of what you would call soul food. But my mom was really adventurous. And I think Julia Child had something to do with that.
Oh, wow.
The podcast that comes up over and over and over again, how much she influenced a generation of women. Jacques Pepin also.
Yeah.
They were watching PBS. Mom was reading National Geographic, which arrived in our house, and we were not allowed to cut up the National Geographic when we made collages. That was
keep them pristine.
And my dad had the binders for them, and then the basement in our rec room, they had all the binders. But she would read about food from distant cultures, and then she would try to make it at home. So we had weird spices, and
what's weird to you then?
Well,
because it's an interesting. What is weird?
Okay, lemongrass was weird when I was growing up.
Remarkable. You had lemongrass in your household.
Well, we had a large Vietnamese population in Minnesota, because of both the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church opened their arms after the fall of Saigon, and a lot of Vietnamese families moved to Minnesota. And so that started to show up at the farmer's market. And Mom's like, oh, let's
Very
experiment, with this. Sumac, not something that a lot of people had in their kitchen cupboard.
No.
Mom was willing to try things. Some of it worked. Some of it was, we'd kind of stir around on the plate. But
what about Scandinavian cuisine? Was your kitchen inspired by that?
I would not say that we had a full embrace of Scandinavian cuisine. It was not a palate that mom or dad really liked. It's very juniper berries. It's a bright, sharp palette that we didn't do a lot of. However, at Christmas, we did it more in baking.
Of course.
So those little lattice cookies that people would hang on those little trees, and with all the powdered sugar, we would do some of that. Pickled herring.
Yeah.
My parents loved pickled herring.
On like rye or on like some like thick bread.
Wassabröd.
Yeah.
That very hard tack.
Exactly.
They would have that on wassabröd.
There's something about the contrast of a pickled herring and that really hard bread that works.
And the brown, the pumpernickel version of that.
Yep.
The hard kind of. So they liked that.
Yeah.
Gefilte fish, which I think is actually Jewish.
Yeah, that's a Jewish dish, and as a Jewish person, I can't imagine somebody eating that without a holiday
I reached
requiring
for gefilte fish, but I meant to say lutefisk.
Okay, lutefisk is
that's what I meant to say is lutefisk.
That can be a tough hang.
Like I said, there was they didn't, but we were surrounded though. I mean, I went to school with. I think there were a couple kids named Nels in my graduating class. I mean, it was, a lot of Olsons, a lot of Lundgrens. So that was in our orbit.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily on our table.
Let's talk about the show Your Mama's Kitchen. You ask celebrities and cookbook authors and folks like Roy Wood Jr. the simple question, what was served in your mama's kitchen? And what does this simple question allow you to do as a journalist? What does this tell you?
It opens up a world of possibilities. I knew that because, Matt, in the years that I hosted NPR, the standard question when you have to do a mic check.
Yeah.
You need to, someone needs to look at the levels, make sure. And I have such a low voice that they used to say there's a lot of smoke in my voice, so they'd have to make sure, and I'm a low talker, that we were at the same level. So you have to get someone to talk. And I would need them to talk for a while so they could ride the levels. And the standard question was always, what did you have for breakfast?
Right.
And the answer was never long enough. Like, we never found the person who said, I made overnight oats and I added pumpkin, chia, blah, blah, blah. It was always coffee or toast or something. So I started to ask different questions. And for a while, it was, do you use paper or plastic when you go to the grocery store? And then paper was basically outlawed, and so that was not a good question. So I came up with a series of questions that I would ask people. Your first summer job.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you wore to prom?
That's fun.
That is a fun one. And that would be a good podcast at some point also.
That's a really fun one.
Yeah. What did you wear to prom? Or what did you do for fun on a Saturday night? Tell me about your mama's kitchen. And tell me about your mama's kitchen always opened people up. No matter if they had, we were talking to, I remember a banker from here in New York, after the crash, someone who was, held responsible. And I asked him, tell me about your mama's kitchen. His shoulders loosened. He told me about how his dad earned the money, but his mom grew the money. And we had a totally different interview because I got him into a different frame of mind with that question. So when we ask that question of people, it is the same question over and over and over again. Yeah. And it takes you in completely different directions. And it's a way to learn someone's origin story. And the theory of the case, Matt, is that you're not just fed in the kitchen. Yeah. It's your first classroom. It's where you learn about justice and generosity and grace and grievance. It's where you learn how to argue well or not.
Right.
It's where you learn about abundance or scarcity. All these things are where you first sort of learn how to handle these issues, these emotions. And so we talk to people who are fairly well known, and yet we learn something about them that often they've never talked about, that many people don't know, or, from you get to see their life from a slightly different facet.
Yeah, when you ask somebody to go back to childhood or go back to young adulthood, and the topics discussed at the table and the culinary side of it, the way that the dishes are served and coursed out. This is such a rich text, and I think with the Roy interview, which I love, and I'm going to link to that one. He talked about growing up in Alabama.
Yeah, and
I guess my question is, how do you get the conversation moving beyond this is the food? Is there like a trick to getting them into that headspace?
Roy is a good example of that because his parents were like ships in the night.
Yep, I remember.
His mom was working; she was in school. His dad was a journalist. And he's Roy Wood Jr., Roy Wood Sr., well-known journalist in Birmingham, who was always out in the world. So when he wasn't on the air, he was emceeing some function. He was just gone. And so food was not their love language in their family. So the conversation quickly shifted from what they ate to how he had to learn how to feed himself and how he had to learn how to cook for himself and how he had to, he talked about how he's a very adventurous eater now, but he wasn't an adventurous eater when he was young because you just had to figure out, okay, what am I going to, I need nutrition. Where's it going to come from? He talked about going overseas, or not going overseas, but leaving town on a school trip. And he said, if I had this much money every day, no, I'm not trying spring rolls. No, guacamole, no, thank you. I'm not going to try that because if I try guacamole and I don't like it, that's my food money for the day.
Yeah.
I'm hungry the rest of the day. But then he goes back a little bit further, and a lot of people also talk about their grandparents and the distance between their grandparents and their parents. And sometimes their grandparents didn't have much, and sometimes their parents had a lot more. In his case, his parents didn't cook a lot, but his biggest food memories, the most vibrant food memories for him, come from visiting his grandmother. His family has roots in Tennessee and Mississippi, and going back to her kitchens, and that's a very Southern tradition.
I mean, it's amazing.
Send you further south to go to the grandparents.
It's amazing how the simple question can get to that point of migration and family history going back generations. I attribute it to your ability as an interviewer, but also why food is such a rich text, and we talk about it a lot on this show.
Well, can I just give you an example?
Sure,
of that?
please.
Because there's something like I talked to Conan O'Brien.
Yeah,
and he talked about being in a big family. Stephen Colbert talked about this also in a big family, and how to this day he eats so fast.
Because of the many brothers and sisters.
Yes, because if you wanted seconds, you couldn't get seconds unless your plate was clean. So you had to hoover, everything down to get to it. But then when Conan started talking, a lot of stuff came up about how he learned how to be funny. And then he got wistful about his mom. And he lost both, his parents recently, very, one after the other. And I when I heard that, I thought immediately of the stories that he told. But he talked about his mom was one of the first women to graduate from an Ivy League law school who then went to work in a white shoe law firm in Boston. And she was so smart, but she was never allowed to have the sort of same the status that her peers had in the law firm. And he told the story that has stuck with me and again, it wasn't about the kitchen, but it was about food and about how the lesson that she taught her kids and where it came from. He finally realized where it came from, telling her kids always be an upstander, like stand up for other people.
Mm-hmm.
She was in a big case, and those wood panel boardrooms that they have in a law firm. Yeah. Their client was coming to meet with them, but they wouldn't allow her in the room because she was a woman. And he said, if I'm honest, it probably had something to do with her being Irish too. Because in Boston
in the 50s, 60s, it was a different era.
So she had to sit outside at a card table. Wow. And a few of the lawyers said, you know what, I'm going to go have my tuna fish sandwich out with her. If being this close to power means I have to do this to one of my colleagues, I'm not going to do that. And he said that lesson always stuck with him, be the person who would step outside of that space of power and instead be with your cherished colleague and show that person respect. And I tell my kids this story now, and this is the dilemma. Who would you be? Be the person.
Be the one who goes outside and sits at the card table with your colleagues. And, Conan clearly had a really tight crew at the Harvard Lampoon and on his late night. So it seems like he probably took some of that ethic in the way he ran his business. Your production is part of Higher Ground, which is the Obama's production company. You've had Michelle Obama on your show, and you talk about the business that's, it takes place at the kitchen table, at the dinner table. What's it like talking with the first lady, former first lady? What's it like talking about the business at the kitchen table with the former first lady? It's got to be, as a journalist, a really special moment.
Well, it's unusual for me because she is one of my closest friends.
Yeah,
we've known each other for a very long time, and the kitchen table metaphor is the one that we use in our life. It's where we talk to our kids, sit down, we have to have a talk. We have our own kitchen table talks, so it's a place where I can let down my hair and she can let down her hair. But it was really interesting to talk to her about her kitchen table because, she's done a few books now, a few book tours now.
Here at Crown Publishing.
Here at Crown Publishing, yes.
We published First Lady.
2 books, and then the journals that go along with those books.
Absolutely.
BAFO book tour, in both cases.
Stadiums
all across America. And I, did some of the interviews on the book tour with her, traveled with her throughout the entirety of the second book tour. And she's done umpteen interviews, been on the cover of all kinds of magazines, and yet when we sat down and talked to her about her mama's kitchen, talked to her about Marion Robinson and the kitchen that she ran on Euclid Avenue on the south side of Chicago, we learned things about her that she had not shared before because she talked about the business that happened at the kitchen table. And that was where she had a cousin who came back and went to college and came back with a big afro and a different attitude, talking about this thing called feminism. Wow. And how some of the Southern, because in Chicago most Black folks do come from the South, looked at that and were like, oh, what is this new attitude that, you're talking about? You're going to do this and you're not going to do that. And Michele, a young Michele LaVaughn Robinson looking at that and being intrigued. Oh, there's another way of being in the world, and talking about that, talking about bills that were paid or weren't paid, talking about images that when you listen to her talk about her life, suddenly she's not just the forever first lady. She's a young woman that you recognize taking that old Princess phone with the long 10-foot twisty cord and taking it into the bathroom so she can have a conversation with this guy that she's sweet on that her parents and her brother Craig, aren't going to hear. That's an image that suddenly she's not just an icon. She's always an icon, but she's not just an icon. She's a young girl that you relate to. And you think, I was living that life too. When she talked about the table with the stains on it and the cigarette marks on it, suddenly people become closer to the ground, for us. And you understand that that's where she developed so many. And these are things she didn't even write about in her book, that she was really able to, open up and talk about. And that's the beauty of a question like this, that the kitchen, the work that I do in most of the stories that I try to tell and present to the world, whether it's through the podcast or through my journalism or through the work at the Race Car Project, is to try to help people see other worlds, but also see themselves in those other worlds. It's like holding up a mirror and a window.
That's what good journalists do, though. That's like a tenet.
I hope so.
That's a tenet to what journalism is about. Back to the former First Lady. When the Obamas entered the office in 2008, it was obvious that there was a big change happening with food in that administration. I think mostly about Michelle Obama's garden. I went back and listened to an old piece that you were part of on NPR about the first harvest of the garden. Of course, Sam Cass was the White House chef at the time, and he wasn't like other White House chefs. He was really about wellness and fitness and really sustainability, all the buzzwords. Being so close to the Obamas and having such a deep interest in food, you must have played a role in influencing a little bit. But I want to know, did that initiative, upon reflection, and where we're at today, did it help?
I'm not going to take credit for that. That was Sam and Michelle.
Yeah,
that was Sam and Mrs. Obama. I mean,
I'm not giving you credit. I'm just saying you.
No, but I'm just going to be clear. All credit goes to Sam on that.
Okay.
And she had an interest in food because she's always been, she'd long been on a fitness journey herself. She had seen what happens if you eat a diet of Southern soul food. It's delicious, but it's not always good for you. she had been on a journey with her own girl. She's written about this where a doctor said, I think it would be good if you sort of looked at the diet that you're serving at home to make sure that your kids are on a healthy path. So she brought that into the White House. And I think the larger issue for them, and this is something that I think historians will come to understand when they just look at the pictures at the White House and when they look at the cadence of the events that they were doing. More children entered the White House in that 8 years than I think have ever entered the White House in the, up through the 43 previous presidents. They just decided that this is the people's house, and by people, we mean the kids too. So there were kids at that White House all the time in tours, in workshops around poetry and fashion and literature. And the garden was a big part of it. And so, yeah, I do think it made a difference. The industry fought it, and talked about it being the, introduction of the so-called nanny state. But look what's happening now. I mean, literally right now, Arkansas is talking about changing their whatever they call food stamps in that state requirement so that you have to limit the amount of money that you spend on junk food, fast food, high sugar, cola, high sugar sodas or pop or whatever.
And West
you
Virginia
call it.
just passed
West Virginia's doing something.
Of many different dyes. West Virginia, of all places, is being progressive.
Well, I don't know that they would use that word, but when it was introduced by the Obamas, it was certainly called progressive.
Yeah.
In Louisiana, where the food stamp program is called the Louisiana Purchase for real, they're now introducing these kind of standards. The moment I realized it, I was in Hershey Park, the
amusement park?
The amusement park, which is actually a great amusement park.
It's a great one. It's underrated.
Yes, it is underrated. It is underrated. I had an event near there, and, life works in funny ways. Something didn't work out, so my son had to come with me. And my mother was living in Washington, D.C. at that time, and she had to come too.
Just drove him up.
So, I was like, I got someplace I got to be, and you just have to come with me. And to sweeten the pot, I said, we'll stop at Hershey on the way home. And so we went to Hershey Park and, zoomed through. My mom had a little scooter, and we were running to keep up with her on this little scooter. And we went to get lunch. And there was a salad bar over in the corner. And, of course, my son goes straight to food on a stick.
Yeah.
Something he can dip, and my mom said, I think I want a salad. So I went over and I started to get a salad. And the woman who was helping me said, this is our Michelle Obama salad bar.
Oh, my goodness.
They were so proud of the fact that they went to the people at Hershey and they said, the First Lady says we need to be eating better. And so they petitioned and they created this salad bar. And the woman told me that this is in honor of because people always talk to her, particularly women of color, but not just women of color. People would call her our First Lady. They felt a connection to her. And I, later told Michelle about that. And I don't know, Michelle Obama about that. And I don't know how long that salad bar lasted, but that was just a small measure of the impact that, that she had, making people think about how they ate.
Historians will prove, and that's what we can't judge this administration until long after it's there, and many administrations follow. Last question about the Obamas: what's the double date like in current times?
You mean to go out on a double date?
Yeah.
Well, it's always loud, a lot of laughter, and they, they always like to go out. That was another thing that was really good for Washington.
And New York.
Yes.
Incredible patrons to restaurants here in New York.
And you don't understand what that does for the restaurant industry to get that kind of endorsement.
Stella, the restaurant Stella on Houston Street, Obama's, were there with frequency.
Yeah. Like when you asked me the question afterward, I thought, I didn't mention Tessa. I love, the restaurants that because it's hard.
Yeah.
Running a restaurant is really hard work.
Yeah.
And living in the White House is also hard. And so a lot of people just cloister themselves and decide, well, we're not going to go out because we have to have service and we have to enter the side door and they figured out that, we can go out into the world. We can show people that we support the city. We can show people that the city is a safe place to be because the District of Columbia sometimes is seen as the District of Calamity and people are afraid to, come into town. Can we really go to that part of the city? And they were adventurous eaters. And so they liked to go out, and whether it was with a group of, her with a group of girlfriends or a circle of couples that they would go out with, or, when the girls were still living in the White House, taking the girls out and, being a family that was out on the town.
Well, it's trying to create normalcy, right? And like part of a normal family is going out to dinner at a restaurant in a normal part of town with normal service.
Well, and part of life is also, you asked about the double date, is also holding on to your friends.
Oh, sure.
Your friends keep you grounded. Your friends keep you sane.
Yeah.
And that's part of a message, also that she actually writes about that. Mm-hmm. And there's studies that tell us now, a good circle of friends will add 10 years to your life.
I love that. I think it's right.
I know it's right.
Yeah, I know that's right.
The laughter, the wisdom, just knowing that you have someone.
The texts.
Yes.
The texts, the group texts. And that's like our future friend circles are all going to be in text.
Well, texts are fine, but make sure you see each other every so often.
Great reminder, Michele.
Especially, frankly, as you get older.
Yeah.
You need to do wellness checks on people. Yeah. And just, because when you look people in the eye, you can see, okay, I see something that you're not saying on text.
Yeah, you can't hide from your real feelings when you're in person, unless you're a psycho. But
and the other thing is, you have found family.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say this: found family is a treasure. You are given the family that you're born into in life, and sometimes that is a treasure on its own, and sometimes it's a little more complicated than that, and we'll just leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that.
But found family is a treasure, and if you have someone that is not a blood relative, but feels like it, hold on to that person.
Mm-hmm. I can't let you go without talking about the Race Card Project. I was recently introduced to it, and I'll link to it on the show notes. I spent, 90 minutes just pouring through these cards, a simple concept that you've come up with. It's really important right now in 2025 to read these messages. Explain what the Race Card Project is.
So I wrote my first book, actually, Penguin Random House book, published under Pantheon with the wonderful editor, Errol McDonald. So shout out to Errol.
Yeah.
It was called The Grace of Silence, and it was about all the things I learned about my very complicated racial legacy in my family, because my parents saw some stuff and never talked about it, in Jim Crow America, because they wanted us to soar. So they didn't feed us their stories of disappointment and, in some cases, degradation, and how steep the hill was for them, because they didn't want to put rocks in our pocket. They wanted us to soar. I learned some of these things and wrote a memoir. And when I went out in the world, I knew I would be talking about race. And at that time, I thought, no one wants to talk about race. I mean, no one wants to talk about race. So how am I going to? I'm on a 35-city book tour. This is a chance for me to learn something about America. I think Americans actually have lots to say, but I have to get them to unfold their arms. And so the idea was this just simple question. Tell me about race, but you only get 6 words.
6 words.
Yeah.
6 words.
Yeah, just 6 words.
And you can do a lot with 6 words.
That's
the proof there.
You can put a whole lot into a small package. And I didn't want to say, give me a sentence, because people would,
M dashes, compound sentences. It becomes,
exactly.
You get into like a 65-word sentence.
And then if you ask for a paragraph, what is this? An essay? Is this a entrance exam or something? And so just 6 words.
Smart.
And it fit on a postcard. My parents were postal workers. It was an homage to the Postal Service, I guess, in some way. And I printed 200 postcards. And this is when I was on book tour for this first book, didn't know what it would become, but the cards just kept coming back. And then I got the publisher to print cards, and I was working with someone great in marketing named Katie Friedman, shout out to her also, who said, you got to keep going with this. And,
love that.
And then I printed cards. Melissa Bear, who's been with me since the very beginning, she knew printers all over the country. I was going to Salt Lake City, Utah, found a printer, printed out a bunch of cards there, and I was leaving postcards everywhere I went when I was on book tour. I was leaving them in bookstores. I was leaving them in coffee shops. I was leaving them in Bibles inside of hotel rooms. I was leaving them all over the place. And then thanks to social media, the cards started to come in. A group of soldiers were sitting around, and they all sent their cards in from Afghanistan.
Wow.
We started to get cards from Brussels and a group of students in South Korea, and then teachers started using it in the classroom. So here we are almost 14 and a half years later, and we have officially archived more than 700,000 cards. It was 500,000 when the book was published.
Wow.
The book, Our Hidden Conversations.
That's from 700,000?
Yes.
Wow.
And they still come in every day. And so we post some of them on the website so people can see them.
Where do they come into your house?
No, the postcards, there are still postcards that come in. I got a big stack of them from Ohio recently. And then I got a stack. I was recently in South Carolina where a group of people all had book talks about the book, Our Hidden Conversations. And I got a stack from South Carolina. But most of the submissions now come in digitally.
Yeah.
So the vast majority
That's good.
of them come in digitally.
Which is what I was experiencing by visiting the website. When you look at this collection in 2025 coming in and, the 6 words are published with diverse viewpoints, what does it tell you about America in this very unique time?
Well, it tells me that I created this project based on an incorrect premise that no one wants to talk about race.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people do. They're just looking for the right on-ramp, a place where they can have their say. A lot of the people who share their cards are, in the 14 years that I've been doing this, the majority of the stories have come from white Americans. Newsflash for me. I did not expect that. I'm a woman of color. I'm a Black woman. Talking about race, put the basket on the table. I thought it would primarily be people of color who showed up to tell me about their experiences. It means a whole lot of white Americans feel like they're left out of the conversation about race. It means that we have, for all the stories that we've collected, if you think about it, the burn rate, the number of people who come and just lurk like you did, but don't necessarily share a story. So if you figure we have this many stories that we've archived, think about how many people have just come to the site to take a look, to roam around in someone else's life and see how someone else thinks. So I think we're more curious than we understand about each other. And maybe we're looking for tethers of understanding, not necessarily to agree with people, but to have a sort of a better understanding. And it also tells me that everybody has a story.
Yeah.
Everybody has a story. And sometimes you have to tell that story because someone else needs to hear it.
To be clear, too, it's the 6 words and then follows with a paragraph or an essay. So there is some elaboration, which is important.
Which is the nice thing about people doing it online.
Online, it's easier.
Because we added 2 words, anything else, and then people could explain.
Anything else, and then you add them more. I just have to ask you, right now, looking at the submissions, how much of it is about DEI? How much of it is it about DEI laws being repealed, DEI policies being revoked in the private sector, and then of course the current administration's point of view on DEI. I dipped in, as I mentioned, and it's from all over the spectrum. Lots of thoughts on DEI.
Yeah, that is the I liken the archive, and the book I describe it as a form of social dendrochronology. Dendrochronology being the study of tree rings. Mm-hmm. If you cut a tree down, the tree rings will tell you the story about the life of the tree and the surrounding environment. So the tree rings will tell you if chemicals were introduced into the soil. They will tell you about development that happened nearby. It will tell you about the cycle of nature, whether there were natural disasters or, acid rain or, whatever. This archive, bookended by the presidencies of Barack Obama and the second presidency of Donald Trump, with a global pandemic in between and economic tumult and the rise of AI and migratory patterns all across. All of that is captured in this. And so, yes, DEI now is one of the tree rings, is one of the things that we're hearing, the rise and fall, the rise of some of these programs in the wake of George Floyd's death, and the death of these programs, the elimination of these programs, under Donald Trump's second presidency. So, people are talking about sometimes DEI specifically, but sometimes they're also talking about the things that are kind of ancillary to DEI. Like,
it's coded. I mean, coded language around.
Coded or sometimes not even just coded. People who feel like if you can interrogate some of the issues at the core of the discomfort with DEI, when you understand that, yes, for some people, they feel like if one group of people are being included in the process, that means that they perhaps are taking jobs away from other people who are more worthy. The idea that some people, that if you have DEI, that means that you're lowering standards to include a broader class of people, as opposed to just saying we're going to look for talent wherever it exists, and that means we're going to be studying a broader pool of people. So it's really instructive to be able to hear from people that you might not agree with, that you might not understand, to get a sense of this. And then on the other hand, we have been quietly called into places, in some cases in very red stretches of America, politically red stretches of America, where, we're called into work with a small factory, or in one case, a very big factory, quietly called in to do work. They wouldn't call it DEI work, but the person who runs this factory says, hey, I've got a lot of people here who don't agree with each other. They show up for work with MAGA stickers on the back of their cars and their trucks. And then I've got other people who show up with, they bring tamales in their lunchbox, and they have Spanish language stickers, and they listen to, music, Tejano music, and, this group doesn't get along with that group. And then this group, over here, they keep to themselves, and they're all, people of color. And in that case, then they separate themselves because some of them are from the South and some of them are, Northerners who found their way. He's got all these fiefdoms, and he realized this is undercutting productivity. So politically, I'm on this side of the table, but I got to figure out how I get all these people in this space to exercise this thing called teamwork.
When they call you in, what does that mean? When they call you, are you reporting on this dynamic?
No, I actually come in and I
workshop?
use the Race Card Project, because what happens is you can use the archive at the Race Card Project to set the stage for a really interesting conversation. So you don't walk in a room and say, tell me about yourselves. You spend some time looking at as you did.
You share some of the thoughts for the past couple years.
Yes. Yeah. And you put together a deck, or you put together, you ask them to go on the website. There are different ways that we do it.
Yeah.
But they talk about they explore other people's stories, and then they're talking about other people, and then toward the end you say, well, okay, let's talk about
write your own.
Write your own and talk about yourselves. And
that's cool.
And in every case when we've done that, whether they've used it in the military, the Justice Department, a couple government agencies in the past have used it, embassies have used it, schools have used it all across the country. What it does is it creates a trust dividend. So people have a conversation. They don't agree with each other. There usually is a few fireworks in the room. People are...
I like trust dividend.
People... more than a little tension in many cases, but they survive. Nobody spontaneously combusted. There weren't fisticuffs. No. They had a rich and yeasty conversation where they didn't necessarily agree, but they learned about other people. And in every time we've done this, and sometimes it is a little bit like juggling chainsaws, it's nerve-wracking and it's a little bit scary to do it. But at the end, people realize, oh, okay, I don't like you, I don't like your politics, but I know a little bit more about you now.
Yeah.
And that's a trust dividend that you can use going forward to figure out how people can continue to work with each other and row in the same direction, even when we don't agree with each other. And we have to figure out how to do that, because as a country, we are becoming increasingly divided, and there are people who are seemingly invested in those divisions.
It's called the Race Card Project. I'm linking to it in the show notes. Please give it a look. I might do my own postcard.
I think you should.
I think I'm going to do that. You should do it too. Michele, and this is Taste. We ask guests about the discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The best fruit.
Mango.
You answered that very quickly. But what makes a great mango for you?
A great mango a bad mango is disappointing when it's too hard.
That is true.
But I love when it's soft and it has just a little bit of bite. And the magical thing that I like to do is squeeze a little bit of lime on mango.
Always.
And it just opens up that
the sweetness. It adds.
It does something to it.
It's
really it's science.
Yeah.
Or something. But yeah, mango. I answered very quickly. I was tempted to say peach. But you can get mangoes all year round. You are guaranteed a good mango all year round when you're not guaranteed a good peach all year round.
There's been a couple bad years here in New York State with the peaches. Stone fruits have not been good, but I'm hoping for this year to be a good year. The worst vegetable?
Lima beans.
Yeah. Fair. Like, why?
I've grown to... I actually kind of sort of like them now because I've learned how to season them. Growing up, they tasted like candle wax.
Yeah, they didn't.
They had the consistency of candle wax.
Are these canned you're doing?
We didn't. We had fresh butter beans, which are slightly different
Yeah.
than lima beans, but lima beans were frozen.
Right. That's typically how you get them today.
Yeah.
You think about canned lima beans as being, as a child, the worst food.
Well, they had the gloopy, glappy,
Oh, yeah, right.
kind of greeny, slimy kind of stuff in it. Where lima beans, I actually have used lima beans, frozen lima beans in soup, and I've made it work. If not for gumbo, I might have said okra.
Yeah.
But,
Okra gets beat up on a lot during this question. But I think I've had defenders say it's just about cooking it correctly, obviously.
Well, we just talked to Wendell Pierce on Your
Wendell
Mama's Kitchen.
Pierce,
Yes,
great.
he's this week's episode.
Love that.
And his mama says she has the secret to cooking okra, which is if you're sautéing it, don't put any oil in the pot. The slime will emulsify the pot, and it'll take the slime out, and then you get something that has got a little bit of heft to it without that. When we were a kid, we used to call okra Soylent Green.
Yep.
Because of the texture. But,
Yeah.
okra, to me, gumbo's not gumbo without okra.
Hot, dry pan, no oil. That's the tip. I like that. Do you have a typical breakfast?
At this point, it's usually a boiled egg and some fruit.
What's the fruit choice?
Well, mango.
See question one, answer one.
See answer one.
Yeah.
Often mango. I like mango with blueberries. It's a wonderful combination. I go through phases. Like for a while, my go-to breakfast was cottage cheese and blueberries.
I love that.
You're kidding.
I'm such a defender of cheese and cottage cheese and blueberries.
You're
and
kidding.
Fruit. I'm a huge defender.
Because most people are like, ew.
Ew, right?
What are you doing? Yeah, it actually, that was.
I love it.
And then I
Good
do
choice.
like in the summer, my go-to breakfast is a piece of really good bread. I often use the Genesis bread, the sprouted wheat bread.
Yeah.
Toasted with butter and sea salt and a fresh garden tomato. And it tastes like a tomato tart. And sometimes I'll shave a little cheese and put on it. But just summer tomato.
Yes. A great breakfast open-faced sandwich. Perfect. The best dessert.
There's two people on my shoulder right now, and one of them is saying lemon meringue pie, and the other one is saying strawberry rhubarb. I'm a pie person more than a cake person, although I love a good pound cake.
Oh, wow. That's a good one.
Oh, I love pound cake. I love pound cake.
You can't hold back.
I love pound cake, and one of my closest friends, who's also an author, and published a book called Grown Woman Talk here with Crown, is Sharon Malone. She was on the show, and she makes pound cakes all the time. It's her. I think it's how she deals with stress. She's always making pound cakes, and so you want a friend in your life like that. And I love pound cake the next day. This is a good breakfast, also. Slice a piece of pound cake, put some butter in a pan, preferably a black heavy skillet.
Okay.
Put the pound cake in the skillet, in the butter, and let it get browned on both sides, and then take fruit and put the fruit in the pan for just a minute and macerate it and put it on top of. So
I'm thinking like strawberries, cherries.
Yeah, it's like dessert for breakfast.
Berries.
It's kind of like a version of French toast, but without the egg wash.
You're onto something.
But with pound cake.
Is there a restaurant you wish you could bring back from the dead?
The Bite.
Tell me about it.
Actually, I have two answers to this too. One of them actually did come back. The Convention Grill. So the Convention Grill is a old-fashioned diner in Edina, Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis. Cool. I grew up on the south side of Minneapolis, so the far south side, the next suburb is Edina. It was in Edina, right by the lakes. Lake Harriet, which is the lake I grew up. There are lakes all over Minnesota. It was old-fashioned diner. The waitresses wear, white. They dress like Laverne.
Yeah.
Or not Laverne. Was the show Alice? The white uniforms with the little hats and everything. Fantastic patty melts. Fantastic malts. Fantastic French fries. Closed, went out of business. And that one came back. So that one is resurrected. You said, wished could come back. That one came back. The Bite did not come back. And I grieve it all the time.
It was a similar setup.
The Bite is it was in, it's hard to talk about in the past tense. It was in Menemsha, which is a little fishing village on Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. And it was a teeny restaurant that's the size of most people's closets, and they've fried some food in that little space. So you would go up to Menemsha's on the tip of the island, and it's west facing. So you would go up there and watch the sunset at night. You get fried fish, fried clams.
Oh yeah.
Just fried zucchini, fried mushrooms. It was all fried. I think they maybe had a burger on the menu, but I never got that. It was just all fried foods. And I talk about it now, I can smell it. I can think about trying to jockey for the parking space. I can think about the rush to get there before the sun falls and, paper, scissors, rock, who has to run to the bite and stand in line for fried food and get there in time so you could eat the food while it's hot and watch sunfall. And it closed a while ago, and I keep driving by that little shack and hoping that someone will
and it's empty.
Hang a shingle.
It's just great memory, Michele.
And bring back the bite.
What's your favorite city to visit for food outside America?
Thailand.
Tell me about it. Why?
The food is so vibrant.
It really is.
I mean, and unusual and surprising and layered and beautiful.
Yeah. And from north to south, it's so different, right?
It's Bangkok just blew my mind. You said city. I said, and I answered with the country. So Bangkok.
I will take the country though.
Bangkok.
Bangkok's great.
I have only been once, and it was, and I had a sense of what I thought Thai food was.
Sure.
And I was just totally wrong.
Yeah.
I was totally wrong. Vietnam, going through Vietnam, Hanoi, might be a close second.
Yeah.
Because again, I thought I knew what Vietnamese food was and had no idea.
I love that sentiment.
Mm-hmm.
Americanized Vietnamese food can be quite different.
It's very different.
Yeah.
It's very different. The flavor profile is just, people talk about things that dance across your tongue. That was the first time that I actually experienced, okay, now I know what this means.
Right. Last one, your favorite sandwich?
Reuben.
Wow.
A really good Reuben.
Do you have a spot that you pick it up in a restaurant setting, or do you make it yourself?
I have never made a Reuben myself. I guess I could. I eat sauerkraut a lot.
You could.
It's good for you. So at this stage in my life, I started eating a lot of sauerkraut, much to my family's chagrin, I think. But
where do you get it? Where's good Reuben?
Yeah. In New York, there used to be a deli. Was it called Kaplan's?
Okay.
It was over by where FAO Schwartz.
Oh, like in Midtown East?
Used to be.
Yeah.
In LA, Cantor's.
Oh yeah, that's my spot.
And growing up in Minnesota, there was a place called the Lincoln Dell.
Oh wow. Which
has now been replaced by a restaurant called Yum, and Yum is, as the name suggests, delicious, but they don't serve a Reuben anymore. And I actually, when I talk, you said favorite sandwich, it's not a sandwich I eat all the time. I mean, BLT was a close second. Like I love a good BLT.
You got those Minnesota summers with those tomatoes.
Yes.
Definitely.
And tomato. I love a good summer tomato, but it didn't say BLT because BLTs are not consistently great.
Absolutely not. Through the months January through June, you really can't get
You're getting those little hard pink tomatoes, and they don't always get the bacon right. And I know I'm sounding a little bit fussy right now, but a Reuben, if someone is got the sauce to put a Reuben on a menu, you figure out they know how to do a Reuben, and it's usually going to be a pretty good Reuben. I mean, I guess a close, if I were ranking, a number 3 might be a club sandwich, which is always a safe choice if you're in a hotel.
Yeah.
If you don't,
If you got to go club if you don't, want to think about the rest of the menu.
Yeah. And a burger is sometimes you just don't know what you're going to get, and, a good club sandwich. But now you're making me, I have not had a Reuben. I'm trying to think about the last time I've had a Reuben. It's been a hot minute. I think I need to get a hot Reuben.
You got a craving here. Michele Norris, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining this.
Matt, thank you. This has just been yummy. Thanks so much.
Erin Gleason, welcome to This Is Taste. It's great to speak with you. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
I love this conversation. We reconnected at a bat mitzvah.
Yes, I love it.
And your husband was the rabbi. Amazing.
Yes, he was. Yeah, and you were there.
And I was there. A good friend, Jeremy and Tova and Penelope was the bat mitzvah, and I was like, oh my God, I know that person.
Same.
Yeah, it was great, and we kind of reconnected because we worked together a few times when I was editing a long forgotten city website, and you and I used to go to events and cover them. You were shooting, and I was reporting. Oh man.
Yes. Yes, many years ago.
Well, it really taps into your career because you have this wonderful career where you did photojournalism, then you did fine art photography, and then you have a new book, The Watercolor Feast. But take us back. Do you remember when we covered like the Top Chef season 3 launch party? Do you remember that assignment?
I do. I remember sitting backstage with you and talking and sort of waiting for the moment to go out and take some photos. But I love that you remembered what that event was because I was trying to remember.
I literally do have no memory of covering it, and I the only reason I remember is my Gmail had the assignment that I assigned you.
Okay.
I searched your
Yeah.
name.
Oh, I love it.
But yeah, like we covered lots of cool things in New York, and tell me a little bit about your photography background, because this book isn't about photography; it's about watercolor, and you've got this incredible The Forest Feast series. We'll talk about that, but when you first started shooting, what were you shooting?
Yeah, so I moved to New York right after college to become a photographer. I didn't really know what that meant, but I felt like New York was where it was at. I had a photography professor in California at UC Santa Barbara that was from New York and had us read the New York Times Magazine all the time, looking at the photography, and I just really wanted to get there. So I started out working in a couple different photography studios, and I worked at Condé Nast Traveler magazine as an intern in their photo department and wasn't really sure which direction I wanted to go in photography. But after working for a couple years for very different types of photographers, like a National Geographic photographer, a still life photographer, a commercial food photographer, I ended up going back to school to get an MFA in photography, thinking that it might be nice to be able to teach photography in addition to working as a photographer.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went back to school and worked on it.
You went back to school, and you, which interestingly, you did your MFA thesis with the pastry chef Will Goldfarb, and I loved that reference because Will is an absolute legend in the New York City
Yeah.
restaurant game. I think he lives in Bali. I'm not sure, but tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that
I think
thesis.
so. Yeah, so in grad school, they would send us out to take photos and sort of see what we brought back. And I just kept bringing back food photos, like at street fairs or farmers markets or restaurants or whatever. And I was, vegetarian, so I was always really drawn to like the desserts and the colorful things that I could always try. And I think I read an article about Will Goldfarb. I think it was maybe in the New Yorker around like 2006. And I just thought, oh my goodness, this guy is using art as his, he's using food as the medium for his art, just in a way that I didn't see anyone else doing at the time. The molecular gastronomy scene was big, especially with pastry chefs around that time. A lot of people that I was a lot of pastry chefs that I was looking at were kind of coming out of WD-50 with Wiley Dufresne and opening their own restaurants and doing these really creative things around pastry. And I'm certainly not a chef. I didn't go to culinary school, but I was just drawn to food as a medium. So, anyways, I just read this article about Will and I thought, oh my gosh, I would love to work with this guy. And so I just went into his restaurant one night by myself and I sat at the bar. It was a tiny, tiny little space. His restaurant was in Soho called Room for Dessert. And I just sat at the bar and he was behind the bar and I just started talking to him, which is like really not my personality. I'm much more like introverted and shy, but I was just like struck by what he was doing. And anyways, he was super receptive. I told him, I'm working on an MFA thesis in photography. I'm shooting a lot of desserts. Like, I would love to photograph your food. And he said, great, like, come on in. And so I spent a couple months going in several times and shooting on a sandwich board on a stool in his front window of the restaurant during off hours when nobody was there. Bob Truitt was one of the pastry chefs working under him at the time. And Bob made most of the desserts for me. I think he was probably like, what is this girl doing and why am I making her do desserts?
Yeah.
But I ended up turning it into a limited series art book specifically for my thesis. And it went along with an exhibition. I blew up a lot of those desserts and they were in like a gallery show. But I used his dish as inspiration. So he gave me the recipes for each of his desserts. And they had wild ingredients that I didn't even know what
Yeah.
they meant. And the recipes themselves were broken down into grams and all these, like it was like a graph or something. Like I couldn't even read it. But I pulled from his ingredient list and did my own work of art with similar ingredients.
Oh,
So I was like,
cool.
here's the, yeah. So each page of this book was a diptych. So on one side was his dessert, and on the other side was my kind of work of art using similar ingredients, but they were these sort of like abstract still life things shot usually on a light table, so like little floating ingredients, and it's hard to describe, but
Sounds
anyways,
amazing.
it was all in the diptych one.
Were you tasting the desserts along the way? Like what do you have like one dessert that you remember vividly, like the way it was built or constructed?
I called my little art book, which was not published. I self-published it, and it was really mainly for the exhibition. But I called it a photographic exploration of molecular gastronomic desserts,
Nice.
and it's called the Room for Dessert Cookbook. One example of a dessert in the Room for Dessert cookbook that I created for my exhibition was called Enfance. This is Will's title, and some of the ingredients listed were Lucky Charms, cotton candy, a meringue, a toast creme glacé, and milk jam.
Wow.
And his plated version of that is a long tray with four different kind of items. One is a bowl with this kind of cotton candy spluey, like coming out of it. Another is maybe some sort of ice cream with some, I don't know, chocolatey cereal looking items. One is a little structure made out of rectangular marshmallows. And then there's this huge meringue that's kind of like seated in front of the entire platter with a stencil, maybe with some sort of like cocoa powder, but it says the word lucky.
I love it. I mean, it's so
Um,
playful and flavor wise. From what I was told, I never actually went to Room for Desserts. I don't have a memory of it. Some of the most exquisite pairings and creative pairings around. It's a shame.
yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, it was really, really so creative and so inventive and so different for the time and very exciting. I thought it was really cool what he was doing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so my interpretation of that dessert has kind of a series of ingredients, all shown on a light table. There's like a line of marshmallows, a line of crumbled cereal, a line of meringue, a line of Lucky Charms, a line of some sort of flour that I think he had in there. Anyways, it's sort of like a graphic visual interpretation of the ingredients that go into that dish. Because when you look at the photo of the dish, or if you order that dish at the bar, you probably can't really tell what's in it.
So you end up working with two terrific chefs, Elizabeth Faulkner and Piche Ong. Piche is a good friend and been on the show a couple times. What was that like? Were you working on book projects or was it more for the restaurants?
So I ended up, after working with Will, I really wanted to dive into pastry photography. And so I ended up approaching several different pastry chefs. Piche and Elizabeth were two of them. And I was working on a sort of photographic series that I was hoping to turn into a book. It didn't end up becoming a book, but it became an exhibition. But I was just really interested in, you know, people using color and texture and food and really interesting in different ways. And I wanted to document it. So I would, I was working as a volunteer food photographer for the James Beard Foundation for a couple of years while I was in grad school. And that was really a great way for me to get introduced to a lot of chefs in New York and around the country who would come in for these special meals, and I would take photos. But it also gave me access into like the best kitchens in New York City, photographing, some of the most amazing chefs and dishes. But kind of through connecting with the James Beard Foundation, I was able to reach out to a bunch of different chefs and ask them if they wanted to be part of my photo project. So while I was in San Francisco, I reached out to Elizabeth and asked her if I could come in and shoot a bunch of her dishes. And so they made me a bunch of dishes, and I sort of in exchange gave them all the photos, and then I used the photos for my own project. Same with Piche. I got to know him. He's so wonderful. And I went and photographed at Pong and
Mm.
did several kind of shoots with him. that were mostly just like creative collaboration exchanges. I think I might have been sent to Con once on assignment, but um, anyways, I was just kind of creating a portfolio, and I think later that led me to shooting cookbooks and doing other publishing related projects. But at that time, I was really just portfolio building.
I mean, you're tapping into some amazing places when dessert counters were flourishing in New York. Pong and Room for Desserts are just a couple. The pastry program at WD50 as well. It feels right now in New York there isn't as much emphasis on plated desserts as this period, at least in their own space. And I think that's probably an economic issue more than anything.
Yeah.
I'd love to see a return to dessert counters and dessert only spaces where you can pay some money and get like 3 or 4 courses or more. I would love that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, let's talk about Forest Feast. This is such an incredible series that you launched in 2014, and you've written several books under that banner. And it's impressive that you have such a body of work here, and these books sell too, which is like, we don't talk too much about numbers on the show, but like clearly, just looking at your Amazon and just in general, the word of mouth, these are popular books. What inspired you to create the series Forest Feast?
Yeah. So around 2011, my husband got a job in California, and we left Brooklyn and just kind of, this is like the Silicon Valley area, which I grew up in California, but a couple hours from there, so I didn't really know it. And I thought we would end up living in Palo Alto or Mountain View. But just by chance, this little cabin in the woods popped up on Craigslist. And we thought, okay, maybe we'll try this for a year. It sounds kind of like a fun adventure. And suddenly we had just gotten married, and I was suddenly like in this cabin in the woods unpacking, and my husband was going to his job every day, and I was like, what do I do with my life? I just left my entire career. I felt like everything I had worked for like almost 10 years in New York was suddenly like poof. And I was hoping to, reconnect with new editors and new publishers in San Francisco, and I just needed to make a new body of work. I was showing them a lot of these kind of very minimalistic looking photos that I had taken at Michelin star restaurants in New York. And they were sort of like, oh, those are nice and very slick looking, but do you have anything like on raw wood?
Of
like
the era, of course.
No, like, yeah, that like California aesthetic, right? That's a little bit crunchier. And I was like, okay, I'm living in a cabin in the woods. I can do this. So I just started taking photos, and I got really bored of my kitchen table and started walking plates outside. And we had just started getting this farm box of local California produce, and I was making very simple dishes just myself, like a lot of salads and appetizers and things that I was just trying to make them colorful and interesting to photograph, because I suddenly didn't have this network of chefs to make things for me. So, I'm very much a home cook and always love to like throw dinner parties. So I was like, I can make some cute stuff to photograph. So when I think back to that time, it was like suddenly everything came to a halt, and I didn't have any editors or assignments or anything happening, and I didn't have children also.
Yeah.
So I could just really dive into this creative project. And I started a Tumblr as a way to kind of flesh my ideas out and just post. And I wanted to just have new photography online in the form of a link that I could email to like the new, editor at whatever company in San Francisco and say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Like, keep me in mind for any assignments that come up. And little by little, that Tumblr started to grow. And I think it's because I was shooting kale salads on mossy logs and like, roasted carrots on a stump that had just been chopped down. And they're kind of just, very nature filled and sort of very different looking than probably a lot of the photography that you saw in food blogs. This is like around 2012. And they just sort of started to get picked up, and other blogs started featuring my blog. And I never set out to be a food blogger. And honestly, I didn't even read that many food blogs, but I was having fun with it and just diving full in on kind of experimenting, because I was like, I don't have anyone to please. I'm going to make this fun for myself. And I had in New York, I taught photography at FIT at the Fashion Institute, and I taught Photoshop mostly. And I was always interested in layering photos in Photoshop. So instead of just typing out the recipe on my new blog, I started using my handwriting, and I would write on paper, scan it, and then overlay it on the photo. And then I needed titles, and I couldn't find a font I liked. So I would start painting the title of, kale salad or whatever it is, and putting that like overlaid on the photo also. So they became these kind of like photographic collages that represented recipes. And I think that was, Instagram was brand new at the time, Pinterest was brand new, and these like new visual formats, just like it just went really well. So before long, an agent, a book agent reached out to me and said, I think you should turn your blog into a book.
Mm.
And I said, I don't think I'm ready for that.
Right.
She said, no, I think you are, and I'll help you do it. So we spent several months writing a proposal that she then sent out. And that became my first book that came out in 2014.
That's incredible to hear about the early visually driven internet and how, this really simple idea and like, of course, your immense talent exploded on the scene. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, you have 4 books in the series. Is that correct? Forest Feast?
Yeah, there's 5 actually. Yeah, 5.
5 books, man. And like you have different themes and really what's it been like continuing this series and talk a little bit about the other books.
Yeah, so the first one is just sort of very simple all the books are vegetarian, very simple vegetarian, kind of vegetable forward, produce driven recipes. My whole kind of theme starting out was like something that feels easy enough for a weeknight, but special enough to serve at a dinner party. A lot of them have like very few ingredients, like 5 ingredients or something. Um, because I'm, a home cook, there's often not a lot of like complicated ingredients to find. It's often roasting vegetables with olive oil and salt and garlic and sort of focusing on simple things. So the first book is just sort of basic, like salads, mains, appetizers, drinks like that. And then the next one is called The Forest Feast Gatherings, and it's all about entertaining. So it's like menus for different parties that you might host. So like if you're having people over for brunch, there's like a brunch menu, and here's 4 or 5 things that you could make and actually have enough time to do and prep for. And there's little, tips for how to make a centerpiece and all these little like fun kind of styling things that I love to do also. And yeah, I guess like the unusual part about my books also at that time was that I wanted to be the photographer, the food stylist, the prop stylist, the graphic artist, like the graphic designer.
You designed your book?
Like yes, I design every page. I lay the text. I do everything. And there's a designer at Abrams, my publisher, that like polishes it all up and puts it in the right format to be printed at the end. But I design every page, and it's my handwriting throughout. And yeah, I lay out the whole book. And so It's like one big art project for me. I do all the
It's
things.
amazing. It's something that I think some of our listeners who are considering book projects or journalism, it's such a great example of how if you teach yourself or get schooling in all the elements of a book, you can really do something special. And I love that you have your handwriting in books still, because that that had its moment, right? And then it kind of like left.
Yeah.
But like it doesn't matter
Like
for you.
Moosewood.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the cool thing about your projects and your books is that it's like become quite timeless. It's not like a trend. You've been doing it for so long. I love that.
Yeah, that's nice. Thanks.
It's cool.
It's fun. I think publishers were hesitant to let me do all the things, but Abrams was open to giving me a lot of creative control. So that's why I chose them.
And this leads to your latest book, which is not a cookbook. It is an art book, and I really, really enjoy it. I think in my mind strive to create art, and I'd love to get out the watercolors. If I had watercolors, and you're inspiring me because
Good.
Watercolor Feast is incredible, and it really tell us a little bit about how you set up this book.
Sure. So, coming off of the last couple years, I feel like what struck me was that people are really looking for ways to be creative, and I think watercolor is one way that is really easy and approachable. And you don't have to have any experience, and you can just kind of like sit down for a few minutes and play around with watercolor. And it feels really productive and creative and relaxing and meditative. And yeah, I just think it's really accessible. So I wanted to kind of present a format that was simple enough that people would actually try it. So these are like 15-minute tutorials. There's 40 of them. It's fruits, vegetables, and edible flowers. So each tutorial starts out with a color exercise. So for example, for the orange painting tutorial, it's like, here's how you paint a little orange. You start out and I say, what colors do you see in this fruit? Maybe you see brown and green and a couple of shades of orange, maybe yellow. And so I suggest just doing like an abstract color exercise by just painting stripes of those colors next to each other. And it just takes, a few minutes, but gets you used to the medium. And also it's beautiful. Like in the end, you have this little abstract postcard that you can send somebody. And I suggest that all the paintings in this book are done on postcard sized paper because I think it feels less precious. And if you're painting on a bigger piece of paper, it feels like you need to make it good because it's like big.
Yeah.
So if you just paint on a postcard, it's like more I don't know, approachable, less intimidating. So then I show in a few steps, usually like 4 to 6 steps, how to paint an orange. Like start with a circle, then fill it in, then dip your brush, get it really wet, and add more, and then add a leaf and add a stem like that. And then there's also a recipe. And then so like for this one, I say each one is just a recipe idea, so it's not a full step-by-step recipe with measurements. So this says, make a salad on a platter by topping peeled slices of orange with dried cherries, capers, red onion, mint, pistachios, olive oil, salt, and pepper. And then I have a photo of that orange, like that citrus salad. So the idea is that you paint the orange and then you eat it.
Very cool to incorporate some cooking into it. And I also like how you use like salt as a texture enhancer, and you're kind of, it's like multimedia in a way.
Yeah, and I try to sort of teach some watercolor techniques throughout the book without making it technical. Like I very specifically did not use all the technical terms that one might learn in another watercolor tutorial book. So I just sort of explained it in like, I don't know, normal language. But yeah, so for example, like the painting tutorial for the lemon, to get that kind of like pocked texture of lemon peel, you can paint yellow on the page, and then while it's still wet, sprinkle a coarse salt on there and let the whole thing dry, and then sort of use your hand to scrape off the salt.
Yeah.
And it leaves this sort of textured effect. Yeah, so trying to like bring the food into it as well.
Yeah, I think it's cool to do. It's like a little bit of cooking happening on the paper. And Erin, let me ask you about the watercolor medium. What's so special about it, versus oil or photography or all the other ways you can capture food? Watercolor, it seems, is there's a certain energy there. There's some practicality there. I'm not. I think last time I watercolor, I had single digits as my age. So I need to pick up some watercolors because it looked just like the way you wrote the book is just like so inviting just to start working on it.
Nice.
But tell us about the
Yeah.
watercolors.
Well, I do think it's something that a lot of kids do. And it's like, why along the way we give our kids all these art supplies to play around with, and then along the way, we start to think, oh, I'm not as good of a painter as that kid. And then later it's like, oh, maybe I'm not really an artist. And so I'll just stop. But I think watercolors are accessible because they're self-contained. I suggest buying like a dried palette, not the little tubes, because I think it's just easy to pull out quickly. It's not as messy. It's not as much of a process. It's just more immediate. But a lot of people say like watercolor is not a very forgiving medium, which is true. Like it's hard. Like if you make a quote unquote mistake, then it's a little harder to like cover it up versus with oils. going into oils is a whole project, a whole process. You need like more space and a canvas and like, a palette to squeeze out all the colors. It's like a whole process of, the fumes, and cleaning your brushes is harder. You need some chemicals, and like, it's just a lot more. So I like the simplicity of watercolor, but um, I think like cooking, it's sort of like you just have to let go a little bit.
Right.
You have to experiment a little bit, and you have to kind of be okay if it doesn't seem quite right, or if it needs something else, you just add it, or you just maybe start over if you really don't like it.
Yeah.
So I think um, I like that it's not so forgiving. I think it's a good practice. And I sort of encourage in the book, like, if you make a painting that you don't like, just put it aside and get another piece of paper. Like, just keep going, or just go over it. I've been doing all these YouTube videos in preparation for this book launch. I'm going to have a bunch of videos that go with each tutorial. You could watch me paint while you're looking at the book. And I was painting a strawberry the other day, and you have to let the red part completely dry before you add the little seeds. And I didn't let it dry completely. So one of my seeds, when I tapped it with the dark brown on the red, it like bled. I was like, oh no, that's a mistake. But then in the video, I just kept going, and I was like, you know what, this happens. And either I could set this aside and start over, or I could just use a tissue and blot it and go over it with a little red and notice that that spot looks different than the other spots. And it's just fine. You just have to kind of like let go and keep going. And remember, this is more about the process than it is about the final result. And it doesn't need to be perfect. And I think with a lot of my recipes in the books, I try to create, like just in general, in all the books, I try to create recipes that are somewhat foolproof. Like I would love to do a book that, well, this is sort of this kind of book, but I would love to do a book that just doesn't have any measurements, and it's just like throw things together, which is really hard for some people. I think my brain works more that way, just sort of toss things together. But like I am not a baker because I have a hard time being super precise.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of recipe testers help me with my loose recipes to get them to a place where they work for people. But I like the idea of letting people use their own creativity in cooking. And I think you'll never get there if you're following, not you'll never get there, but it's a different way of getting there if you're following super precise instructions rather than, if you do a sprinkle of sesame and you do it one time, you add way too much, or like next time you remember, okay, a little less sesame.
Yeah.
So there's a creativity that you can allow if you give fewer instructions, maybe.
Absolutely agree. And I think once you start getting those postcard sized piece of paper, you pick them up and you start getting your watercolor collection together, and you start trial and error. It's like any cooking, you start to get into a routine. You start to grow and get better, really. And I see the watercolor practice being very similar to home cooking. So I think a lot of our listeners will be interested in picking up your book.
I think they're both about slowing down too. It's like, they're both creative acts, cooking and painting. They're both about kind of slowing down and being present in the moment and noticing what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's really, in any form, that's really good for us.
Erin Gleason, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. Great talking with you.
This Is Taste is hosted and produced by Eliza Barbanal and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is edited by lead producer Clayton Gumbert and supervised by Pat Stango, Director of Media Production and Development at Penguin Random House. Thanks to Shalia Harris and the production team at Penguin Random House. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Logo and guest illustrations by Ellie Skurzat. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter to keep updated on all cool things in the world of taste.